please welcome General B. Chance Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations for the U.S. Space Force, for a discussion on delivering military advantage in space, with moderator Dr. Nadia Schadlow, advisor on SCSP's Board of Advisors.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with General Saltzman. It's a great topic, a lot of things to cover. I thought what we'd do is just sort of try to cover 4 themes here. Space is a warfighting domain. Love to hear from the General how the department is thinking about that. Modernization opportunities and challenges. The relationship between the Space Force and DoD and the commercial sector. And if we have some time, I'd like to get to the Golden Dome. So General Saltzman, tell us a little bit about what's been keeping you busy. Space is a warfighting domain. I know you have a relatively recent space policy doctrine where space has been discussed as contested, congested, very competitive, a very different environment than when the first satellite was launched in 1957, I think.
Well, first, Nadia, thank you so much for letting me have this opportunity. This is great to be here. I guess I would start by just making sure everybody is kind of hearing the narrative in terms of how important space is, not just for national security, but in the broader economic sense. Just the way Americans live their lives today includes space in a way that they probably don't see on a day-to-day basis. Not just GPS for navigation, not just the satellite communications that we use, but the timing signals that enable e-commerce and internet to connect to things. It's all space-enabled now. But the national security piece is quite important, and potential adversaries have recognized how much of a strategic advantage we get from space, and they've invested heavily in designing systems intentionally to take that advantage from us, meaning attacking satellites, attacking ground networks, attacking links, frequencies. And so now you have the Space Force that's been established to protect those capabilities so that we can maintain those strategic advantages. But that's the recognition that space is likely to be a warfighting domain anytime there's national competition, crisis, contingencies that play out in any other domain. It's going to extend into space, and that's what we're focused on.
How have the ongoing wars, the war in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East, what have they told us about space as a warfighting domain? What have we learned from those wars? And maybe specifically also the most recent Ukrainian the strike against Russian air assets in Russia. What's the relationship of space to that?
Well, first, I think it's fair that we really acknowledge that it's too early to really say we've learned lessons. This is still unfolding. But we're keen observers, obviously, of what's going on, and it's a pretty dynamic environment. It's a modern battlefield, and so we have to pay attention. And a couple of things jump out at me as I look at it through a space lens. First, one of the first attacks that the Russians committed was an attack against a ground station, a ground network, to affect satellite operations. And so it should be very clear that you don't just have to attack in space to achieve space effects. And if our cyber defense isn't sound, then we are vulnerable. Our space capabilities are vulnerable. So that's an important lesson. We have to keep reminding ourselves that you can attack at a lot of different domains and affect the space domain.
And whose job is it in the U.S. on the ground-based defenses? Is that part of the Space Force's job, or are you working with the Joint Force, or?
Well, it's going to be all domains and all hands on deck because it's a complicated problem. But the Space Force recognizes that space capabilities come in several different varieties, and they connect as a system of systems. So you have the on-orbit capabilities, the links that, RF primarily, but laser links as well, back to the ground, and then the ground network to move the data where you need. So we have to attend to all of those nodes, if you will, in order to achieve space effects.
Okay. So do we have the capabilities we need to do that? Offense, defense, sustainment in space? What's your modernization wish list? And in terms of the funding that you have, where is it going?
I think the best way to characterize it is that it's nascent and it's growing quickly as it can. But whether that's technology limited in some areas, resourcing limited, manpower limited, we're growing in all those facets that are required to put the force together. I kind of think about it as concentric circles. We have some capabilities that we're really good at providing, and we can achieve some effects. not where I want to be in order to really be effective enough to deter full-scale operations, but we're adding those circles and growing in capacity, growing in other areas that we're going to need if we were in a high-end kind of combat crisis situation.
Can you tell us more about those concentric circles? You have the center one, a second, a third.
Yeah, there's 3 core functions of the Space Force. The first is we have to maintain assured access to the domain. And that starts with our launch capabilities, obviously relying heavy on commercial industry to provide those launch capabilities. But it's also the ground network of RF links, as I talked about. The second is global mission operations. It's how we really want to use space. Satellite communications, missile warning, position navigation and timing, intelligence collection. This is how, in a perfect world, we would just conduct those operations and be done. But the third core function is now necessary because we have to protect those capabilities and deny an adversary the use of space capabilities against our force. That's the space superiority core function. That's why you see some of our doctrine documents, some of our frameworks that we're establishing talk about having the kit, the equipment, the training, the operational concepts that are necessary to deny an adversary attacks against us and then prevent them from attacking us using their own space capabilities.
And there's probably an offensive component as well to space superiority, right? It's not all defensive.
That's right. So, all operations in the military have both an offensive and a defensive, kind of both sides of the coin are required. Protecting our capabilities is obviously defensive, but denying an adversary the use of space capabilities against us, those kinds of operations would have an offensive component.
Can you tell us a little bit about, the congestion in space, what worries you about that, and the degree to which we can cooperate with our adversaries on that problem set? Because I've read, there's a discussion about that too, that it's of everyone's interest in space to reduce congestion, reduce debris, create a cleaner operating environment. Is that possible?
I think it is. A safe, sustainable, secure domain is in the benefit of everyone. And even potential adversaries recognize that as they grow in using space capabilities the way they want. Having a safe and stable, secure environment is important. The amount of debris, to some degree, is mitigatable. We can control this with responsible behavior. First of all, don't shoot satellites down. Don't blow things up on orbit. That's just irresponsible creation of debris.
Which is what I think China had done, right, several years ago?
Both the Chinese and the Russians have both done that, correct. But there's also safe behavior, like when a satellite is reached its end of life, either deorbiting into the atmosphere where it burns up, pushing it out of a geosynchronous orbit. There's responsible disposal of satellites, and there are responsible launch operations where rocket bodies don't stay on orbit for an extended period of time. They would fall back to Earth and burn up in the atmosphere. So there's a series of responsible behaviors that I think everybody recognizes. We just need a community of interest that says we're going to behave responsibly. Quite frankly, once you document that, once you really identify what those behaviors are, it makes it easier to identify irresponsible behavior, and then collective countries can hold them accountable for those actions.
Mm-hmm. And is there a forum for discussing those kinds of problem sets?
Yeah, the United Nations has taken up that and written a couple of resolutions, one against anti-satellite missile destructive tests, and they're looking at responsible behaviors and trying to document that. There's a lot of interest in that.
So let's switch for a minute to the commercial sector, where obviously this audience and many of the people here, they're the frontline innovators. They're developing, the innovations for you and the force. How would you characterize that relationship? How can we as a department do better? How can the commercial sector do better? And to me, it seems that it's actually a highly integrated relationship. We can't speak about space as a warfighting domain without acknowledging the role that the commercial sector plays. And I think it's different than the other services. Do you agree? Or?
Well, we're bound in a couple of key areas to other services on the way we acquire our systems. It's a pretty onerous bureaucratic process to get funding from Congress.
Really?
Build the requirements, contract those out, receive them, do all the testing. It can be a long, drawn-out process, which means if you're going to go fast at the leading edge of innovation, you've got to do things differently. And so we're trying to explore as many different authorities, as many different contractual mechanisms as we can. We're trying to get out in front and partner with industry to provide some money to help them explore different areas of research and development where we see operational opportunity. So I'm trying to get in front of this as much as possible and create a win-win benefit for both industry, who has shareholders to attend to, but also us recognizing that it can be a kind of a drawn-out process to really put capabilities in the hands of our operators.
And are you optimistic? I think the Space Force has existed for about 6 years now?
Not quite, about
so almost
five.
Five, okay. With the Space Development Agency and the effort to really use new processes to speed that process. I mean, has it worked over the past 5 years, or to a certain degree?
Yeah, I'm really impressed with what our acquisition community's done. They've worked really hard to press the bounds on that. Now, I say, speed of innovation inside the government is different than what you see on a traditional commercial timeline. So I have to take that with a grain of salt. But we're talking about dropping traditional contract actions that could take 5 or 6 years, dropping them down into 3 to 4 years. That's a 30% cut, and we're proud of those cuts.
Yeah.
We recently did a tactically responsive launch where we took a satellite out of the warehouse and we had it on orbit and operating in about 96 hours. That's incredibly fast to do all of the integration, the contract work that was necessary to get the contractor to launch the satellite and put it on orbit. So we're really pushing the bounds everywhere we can to shrink the timelines associated with delivering capabilities, but we still have to go through a government process, and so we're making adjustments as fast as we can.
Is there a message to your commercial space partners that you'd like to convey, or in terms of the areas that you wish that they might focus on more, or to help actually facilitate the relationship that you've spoken about?
Yeah, it's about open communication. Honestly, every time I go out and visit industry, it's an exchange of information that I wish we'd have had a year earlier. Well, I didn't know you were doing that. I could have helped. Or we didn't know that was the best place to ask the question. And so every time we get out, every time we talk to one another and collaborate on the best way to move forward, it's a positive step. I think we have money that could be available to help. I think they've developed things that we're already looking for and we didn't even know they were developing it. So just continuous communication. Raise your hand, ask the questions, see if you can talk to somebody in the government, see where we can bridge the gap faster and faster.
So partly it's getting you out there to see where the innovators are and what they're doing. So invite him.
Yeah, not just me. I'll be the right. I'll be the slowest part of the process probably.
Right.
But tremendous number of engineers and program managers that are out there actively seeking the technology. In fact, I should mention we're establishing a futures command, and the purpose of this command will be to look to about 7 to 12 to 15 years out. What's the operating environment going to look like? And one of the key questions we're going to ask are, what are the technologies that are going to be used against us? What are the technologies that we can leverage to increase our advantages? And then who's working on those technologies? And if the answer is somebody, then we want to start partnering and start to develop that technology. If the answer is nobody, then we want to start to seed that field. We want to start to have the discussions with the right experts, start to develop some demonstrations, some experimentation to really start to sort that out. And so here later this fall, we're going to have a command that's dedicated to that and hope that creates a demand signal for industry that's a little more productive when it comes to science and technology.
I mean, space, like a lot of the AI issues that we've discussed all day today and at the forum, it's a complicated area. Finding the people that understand the domain, younger people that can grow in the domain, is that a challenge in terms of recruiting, in terms of the expertise that you need?
You would think. Turns out America is just a wealth of talent. I'm so impressed with the people that still raise their hand and say, I want to serve. The average Guardian that's enlisting as an enlisted member of the Space Force, about 22 years old, have a lot of college under their belt. These are technically savvy people. We're taking advantage of that. The officers we get about 1,000 applicants for about 350 slots a year.
Wow.
We can handpick, and they are the best and brightest. They're impressive. The young people have really embraced this mission area and are really coming into the service ready to serve, ready to innovate.
Are there opportunities, many years ago when the Army was thinking about how to integrate more cyber expertise into the force, there was discussions about how you let people move in and out of the commercial sector and DoD. I would imagine that this would be similar as well, given also the role of the commercial sector in launch and some of the key operational requirements.
Yeah, I think in two ways it's vital to our success. One is the best innovation, the best edge of technology is not generally in the government. And so we have to deploy ourselves out into industry and make sure we understand what is at the leading edge of technology. And that's from ground networks, from artificial intelligence, machine-to-machine interfaces, not just launch and reusability and satellites and microsatellites, all of that. We've got to deploy ourselves out there so that we understand it. And then second is, we don't want the tremendous skill set that people are coming into the service with to languish and suffer because they are not working at the leading edge of industry. And so we're trying to deploy back, take advantage of educational opportunities, exchange programs to send our people back into industry, even if it's just for 6, 8 months or a year, maintain that credibility in the industry and then bring that knowledge back into the force.
Mm-hmm. So a big theme throughout the panels today has been our defense industrial base and its ability to provide what the force needs in many ways, and choke points and supply chain issues, and there's some great companies out on the floor that are trying to provide more transparency. Are you worried about the ability of our defense industrial base to supply what you need in a secure way, in a reliable way, and in a way where not everything is sourced from our adversaries?
Worried's not the right word. I think we have to be attentive to make sure that we ask the right questions, that we do the right vetting, that we make sure we cover down and are as secure as we can be. But I think that the industrial base has continued to deliver. If there's a commercial market for a capability, the industrial base is there to support. It's when we have the more exquisite things where there maybe not a commercial market, but it's more of a military unique requirement, then we have to work with the industrial base, make sure that they have the right care and feeding so that when we need the long-term investment that we have the industrial base to count on. And so far I've seen good partnership, good willingness to do that if we meet them halfway.
Mm-hmm. We'll have to watch on some of the components like magnets and chips and in satellite building. Let's talk a little bit about launch and the role of the commercial sector in launch, but also DoD's needs regarding launch, and how do you think about that? Who does what in the launch area?
Well, as it turns out, the Space Force doesn't build rockets. We buy launch as a service. And there was a time when that was in jeopardy because there wasn't a good commercial industry to sustain it. In my time in my career, I remember some times where assured access to space wasn't a guarantee. That's not the case right now. We've got many providers that are competing for providing national security space launch. There's a tremendous commercial market that's underpinning that. And as a result, especially with reusability technology, the price of launch has come down dramatically. And of course, that benefits the government. So we have an interest in providing support in the form of space ports, the range infrastructure, some of the ways that the government can help facilitate that base, that market, and then take advantage of the reduction in price. And we're doing that.
Yeah, so the government as a customer is helping to drive scalability in a way, in this sector. You can see it quite clearly in others overall.
Yeah, there's still a government responsibility, I think, for instance, for public safety, for safety of flight, for launch insertion to make sure it's deconflicted against all the orbits on objects on orbit. So there's still a government role, and so we play that role, we provide the infrastructure, and in return, we help this industrial market that we benefit by the reduction in price.
Yeah. Let's go back a little bit to war fighting, where we began the discussion, and talk a little bit about Golden Dome. But I would like to press you more as we're watching on what just happened in Ukraine and Russia. What is the relationship of space to the Ukrainian success in their drone attack? How should we think about that and understand the role that space played?
Yeah, I think the best way to think about it is the access to information, the transparency of the battlefield is to some degree space enabled. The secondary consideration is data has to move around a battlefield. Data has to move from somebody who has information to somebody that can make a decision based on that information. And on the modern battlefield, that is a space-enabled function as well. So when space can continue to provide those services, you have a government or a military that can operate effectively. When those services are denied, you have to come up with workarounds. That slows things down. One of the other lessons that I think we've learned dramatically in this war is the speed of innovation, and I mean battlefield agility. The use of drones in novel ways, the use of complementary assets, asymmetric advantage, data movement. whoever can innovate the fastest is gaining an advantage on the battlefield. So your agility, your ability to see, make sense of what you're seeing, and make a decision is an important element of the modern battlefield. And space has a role in each of those functions.
Are you worried, or I guess I was worried when, over the past few months, we saw an incident where a commercial company decided to kind of hold back on information. Are you worried that the commercial sector almost has an inordinate amount of power? I mean, given how foundational space is, and given how important the commercial sector is to space, I think that's an area for further exploration in a way. What do you think?
We haven't seen that in the U.S. I know what you're talking about, and yes, that's happened in other areas. We do contractual business with companies for important functions across our warfighting. Think about fuel distribution. The military doesn't make fuel. We rely on commercial.
That's true.
We rely on commercial vendors to make the fuel, provide the fuel, distribute the fuel, and that's a vital part of our enterprise. So, space is new, and so we have to again pay attention to make sure operational concepts are sound, make sure that we're working with industry, working with commercial partners, so they understand how it works and how it will work throughout the continuum of a crisis, conflict, or in competition. But we are working with them, and we have experience working with industry when it comes to these vital areas where they provide national security.
Yeah, and I think your point about fuel is right. There are actually other areas where it's commercial sector is just as foundational, and there's a reliance. Absolutely. Yeah. So in switching to Golden Dome, I mean, it seems that that's the success of it will depend on many factors, but it will clearly depend on space and thinking about the planning for that, how it will impact your service. Just tell us a little bit more about your thinking.
Yeah, there's no question that for that to be successful, Space Force is going to play a central role. That's the sensing capability to make sure we can identify threats rapidly, the ability to move information, as I said, from collection to a decision maker rapidly, target quality information, and then now with the President's idea of Golden Dome, space-based interceptors as a line of defense. We call them effectors, right? That's the jargon that we use to say being able to stop that threat from achieving its goal or its effects. Space is going to play a role in all three of those areas, and that makes us central to the discussion. There are technologies that we understand, sensing, moving data. There's other areas like space-based interceptors. We've got a lot of work to do. There's going to be a lot of R&D. We're going to need a lot of ideas from industry for how to do it. This is a tough challenge, and our initial discussions have been pretty promising, actually. There's a lot of great innovators in this country, and I'll even say because of this audience, I'm not pandering. Well, maybe I am. But one of our great asymmetric advantages as a country is the tremendous innovative capacity that we see in the commercial sector. And I think space-based interceptors is an area. It requires a lot of technologies to come together, and we're seeing the work, we're seeing the collaboration. There's a lot of positives moving in that direction.
Can you go back to your description of effectors and why, because behind the scenes we spoke about the importance of how DoD terms are understood. So what's the difference in thinking about it as an effector as opposed to traditional defense, to defend?
Well, there's lots of ways to achieve the mission effect. You could disrupt the network so that a weapon that's trying to target is trying to get an in-target update, and it can't get the update, so it can't be as accurate.
Okay.
You could destroy it, like missile defense agencies talked about ground-based interceptors to destroy a missile inbound. When you start talking about cruise missiles, you have to have sensors that can provide targeting information. So the actual ability to stop a threat from achieving its effect requires some kind of effector.
Okay, so it's a broader term, really.
Yeah, you'll hear kill chain.
Yeah, kill chain.
It's the end of the kill chain that says, hey, we collected the information, we see the threat, we see the target, we've passed the data, and now somebody has to do something about it, and that's the effector.
Okay. And are you optimistic when it comes to hypersonics and the ability of space-based sensors to sense them, to act at the speed that they need to?
Very.
Okay, good. Well, anything else, sir, that you would like me to cover that I didn't cover, or that you would like to share with the audience?
I often use the analogy that I've been in military space for over 30 years. So sometimes people hear the Space Force is 5 years old and they think, oh, it's about time, or what's new? Well, some of this is old. Like I said, I've been doing this for 3 decades now, and a lot of what we've done, we will continue to do. But there are some new developments, and this idea of space being a warfighting domain is one of those. And the analogy I use is a little bit like converting a merchant marine into a US Navy. The merchant marine is a tremendous organization in terms of taking advantage of a benign domain and delivering services very efficiently. And that's what I did for about 25 years of my career, is provide satellite communications or the GPS constellation, taking advantage of space being a benign environment. Well, that's no longer the case. And as soon as you have to contest the domain, the merchant marine is not really your organization of choice. You need the US Navy to be able to control the domain so you can continue to provide those services. But the US Navy needs different equipment, it needs different training, it needs different operational concepts, and that's what your Space Force is working on. That's going to require resources, a little patience. We're going to have to war game and build simulations. We're going to have to train our operators differently. And that's really what your Space Force is focused on, is making sure that if things go bad in space, the President and the Secretary of Defense have a range of options to choose from, and that's what we're working hard to deliver.
Well, thank you so much. I love that analogy. It's a great one, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
Thank you.